We got a Tyreek Hill update on today's episode of Miami Dolphins Today by Chat Sports. I am your host, Nic Rohloff, because we got kind of a conflicting quote from Tyreek Hill's agent, Drew Rosenhaus, on how he could potentially still be interested in being a Dolphin, but also maybe still requesting a trade. It's a very intriguing quote that we'll share with all of you on today's episode. But make sure you are following me over on Twitter at Nic_Rohloff. I'm talking about the Miami Dolphins on a daily basis over on there, as well as here on YouTube. So if you want wall-to-wall coverage on the Miami Dolphins, well, follow me over there and be subscribed. I want to first start off with this because Drew Rosenhaus shared a lot of things on his client Tyreek Hill, one of them being his injury. We know that Tyreek Hill was dealing with a wrist injury all year long, and Rosenhaus revealed that Hill broke his wrist in training camp and could have had season-ending injury before the year even started, but obviously gutted it out and played almost every single week this year. And I do want to start with this. We've talked a lot over the past 3 or 4 days about potentially trading Tyreek Hill, how I want him off the Dolphins roster, but I do want to make this abundantly clear. I appreciate Tyreek Hill for grinding it out. He had 2 unbelievable seasons in 2022 and 2023 for the Miami Dolphins. This year in 24 wasn't as good with Miami, but Tyreek Hill was without Tua for 6 weeks, was dealing with this wrist injury, and I appreciate him grinding it out, man, because he will go down as one of the most talented wide receivers, if not the most talented wide receiver to ever wear a Miami Dolphins uniform. I mean, back-to-back years of 1,700 plus yards and 20 total touchdowns is just flat out ridiculous. He was the best wide receiver in football over the past 2 years. But as he gets older and older in age, the headaches off the field become larger and larger and larger. Plus, when he has those comments that he had after the Jets game in Week 18, I don't know if I want to have that type of guy in my locker room anymore. And I'm going to say this right here. I appreciate Hill grinding it out. I love it. That's the type of warrior mentality that I want to have in this locker room. But when you publicly request a trade like you did, to me, I don't care if he apologizes to everybody in the locker room, apologizes to the front office, the coaching staff. Once you let that cat out of the bag, time to move on, because if you feel that way even for a split second, that tells me you are not 1,000% committed to the Miami Dolphins, which is why I do still think it would be beneficial for Miami to move off of Hill and trade him at the offseason portion of 2025. But let me know, do you still want to trade Tyreek Hill in the offseason? Type T if you want to trade him. Type K if you want to keep him after finding out some of this information. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section. All right, let's move over to more around Tyreek Hill because there are conflicting rumors on Tyreek Hill on if he wants to even stay a Miami Dolphin. Maybe he still ultimately requests a trade. Now, he did not advocate for a trade when he met with Mike McDaniel and Chris Grier for an hour following his comments on Monday afternoon, but he did not also walk back his statement. Well, agent Drew Rosenhaus said this on the Pat McAfee show today, saying that Tyreek Hill is committed to this Dolphins football team. He had an excellent meeting with Chris Grier and Mike McDaniel. He's the least guy people should be worried about for this organization. So you hear this quote and you're like, okay, all right. So Tyreek Hill now told his agent to publicly walk back those comments, and he wants to stay a Miami Dolphin. He wants to put on the aqua and orange for the next 2 seasons that he's under contract and go ball out with Jalen Waddle and Tua Tagovailoa. That's what any reasonable person would assume from that quote from Drew Rosenhaus, right? Yeah? Well, then a couple minutes after he says that, he was specifically asked if Tyreek Hill wants to be a Miami Dolphin. And Drew Rosenhaus said this: I've got to have that conversation with Tyreek. I'm not going to speak for him. I'm not going to say he does or he doesn't. What are we doing? Which one is it? Is it that he's the least guy the Dolphins should be worried about and he's 1,000% committed to the Dolphins? Or is it the quote that you're saying, well, I'm not going to speak for Tyreek Hill. I can't comment if he does want to stay a Dolphin or doesn't want to stay a Dolphin. Well, what is happening here? This is the exact point I had in the beginning of the show. He is one of the most talented, if not the most talented wide receiver to put on a Dolphins uniform. But when you have these quotes, and it's been now 3-4 days since he originally dropped the trade request following the game on Sunday against the Jets, well, then you have to think to yourself, alarm bells ringing off. If he's not walking back the comments himself, then he at least still believes that he wants out of the Dolphins. to a certain degree, which is why I think no matter what happens going forward, the Dolphins should just wipe their hands clean, move off of Tyreek Hill, and go in a different direction in their wide receiver room. We'll talk more about this in a second, but we are sponsored by Prize Picks, the #1 daily fantasy sports platform out there. It's so easy to play. All you do is pick more or less on 2 or more player stat projections, and you can win up to 1,000 times your money right now. It is playoff time, so make sure you get started. Don't miss out on the last few weeks of football action with Prize Picks, the best place to win cash while watching the postseason. Prize Picks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value to your lineups. Think Lamar Jackson will have more than 250 passing yards, Josh Allen more than 1.5 touchdowns. Cook up your hot takes with your friends and win real money this football season when you and your crew run your game on Prize Picks. I have an entry in for Wild Card Weekend in professional football, more than CJ Stroud, 14.5 rushing yards, more than Cortland Sutton, 64.5 receiving yards. This is just another example of how you can play. You can combine sports, football, basketball, hockey, and more different players, combine them as well. Prize Picks, the #1 daily fantasy sports platform. So download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. One more time, download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. So as we think back to those 2 quotes that we showed from his agent, Drew Rosenhaus, it does not sound like Tyreek Hill is committed 100% to the Dolphins, right? Like, you can at least say that. Based off the first quote, you'd think he's at least committed to Miami in some degree, but then he can't comment on if he specifically wants to be in Miami or not. So that provides a little bit of doubt. And if there is a little bit of doubt, I'm going to quote Ben Affleck in the Batman in Batman vs. Superman. Good, shout out the movie. I'm a comic book guy. It's a quick tidbit, sorry. But he goes, there is 1% possibility we have to take that as an absolute truth. So it's like something like that where if there is something that he feels in terms of not wanting to stay with Miami long term, get ahead of it now. Because if he thinks it a little bit here and you go up to a little bit of a rocky conversation, rocky start to 2025, he's just going to request a trade then. And I don't want to really deal with that in the offseason, if I'm going to be honest. I'd rather just do it here in the offseason so you know what you're doing and how you can build your roster going into 2025. So if you are trading him like I kind of want to do, here are some contract details that we have to know. He has a $27.7 million cap hit in 2025 if he is on the Dolphins roster. If he were to be traded prior to June 1st, which Miami would want to do to get draft capital for this upcoming draft, well, the cap hit actually gets larger. It's $28.3 million. So there is no financial benefit to moving off of Tyreek Hill this offseason, unless you don't use any of that money or asset in 2025. You clear your books for the upcoming season, but more importantly, 2026, and get a 2026 draft pick out of it, because it's a $12.7 million cap hit in 25 if he's traded after June 1st. So you save $15 million in 2025, not eligible to use it for free agency, of course, but there is at least a little bit of a benefit in terms of cap in trading him. And here's another important part. He's under contract for this upcoming season, 25, and the following season in 2026, which he has a $51.8 million cap hit for that year. Now, he won't be playing at that number if he ultimately is still with the Miami Dolphins, because they're going to restructure that contract without a doubt. You just simply can't have a wide receiver getting paid $51 million against the cap. But either way, it just illustrates you why there might be some interest in Miami moving off of Tyreek Hill this offseason and not wanting to have to deal with 2025 and 2026. Don't miss out, folks, because we will have the latest news, rumors all offseason long surrounding Miami, surrounding Tyreek Hill. If you want the best Dolphins coverage, hit that sub button. If a Tyreek Hill trade ever happens this offseason, you know we're going to be live breaking it down. I did want to show this again because we made a video about the top 5 trade destinations for Tyreek Hill potentially if he gets dealt. Well, this is my top 5. Steelers are 1, Commanders are 2, Chiefs 3, Chargers 4, Cowboys 5. I think the Cowboys one is kind of far-fetched. I threw him on there because they will always be linked, and Micah Parsons tried to recruit him on Twitter already. But I realistically think that the Steelers and Commanders are the top two options. George Pickens is a headache. They're going to want a new wide receiver one. Washington has Jaden Daniels on a rookie contract, and they could try to go all in with Tyreek Hill, McLaurin, while Daniels is still on that rookie contract, because by the time Hill's contract is up, Jaden will need a contract, so it's kind of interchangeable. They can absorb the money. But either way, I think there are teams that would be interested in Tyreek Hill in the offseason. Another team that could be interested is the Arizona Cardinals, as they look to get some help from Marvin Harrison Jr. and Kyler Murray. But the moral of the story is this. If you do trade Tyreek Hill, you are going to need to find a way to replace him in your roster. And I will say this. I am fine with Jalen Waddle becoming the wide receiver one in Miami. He's had 1,000 yards in 3 of his first 4 seasons. Yes, he's got a little bit of an injury-prone history, but I believe he can be a wide receiver one in the NFL. I think he's a top 20 guy in all of football. I'm fine with Malik Washington as your slot receiver coming in the next season. Between him and Jonnu Smith, I think they could both work the middle of the field perfectly fine in 2025. So the only way you really need to replace Tyreek Hill, in my opinion, is by drafting a wide receiver or signing one for cheap in free agency to play that X, to play that boundary guy, to allow Waddle to play all over the place in the slot or the Z and let Malik Washington go over the middle of the field. So here are some of the top guys in the NFL draft that I think could be intriguing for the Miami Dolphins. And I'm going to go into their tape and break them down more in depth as we go through this draft process. But Luther Burden would be a first-round pick. I think he's a stud. He can play outside. He can play inside. He's the only one on this wide receiver list that is under 6 feet in stature. Luther Burden is 5'11". He, to me, is getting some height on the boundary for the Dolphins. Trey Harris is 6'3". Torrey's 6'2", 6'3". Kyron Lacey, who was very productive at LSU with Garrett Nussmeier, 6'3". Nick Nash, one of the best wide receivers that you might not have heard about at San Jose State, was absolutely dominant this year. He's 6'4", he's 6'5". Savion Williams, gadget guy at TCU, he's 6'5". Jaden Higgins is 6'4". Tay Felton is 6'2", 6'3". Like, I am targeting big-bodied wide receivers that can potentially play on the outside opposite of Waddle and Malik Washington, because you need red zone threats. That is what I'm looking for here. Wide receivers that could be able to come in and make a difference inside the 5, inside the 10, inside the 20, because the Dolphins offense really struggled this year in the red zone, and I think a big physical contested catch wide receiver might kind of alleviate some of that pressure and struggles that Miami has had. So what you think? Let me know. Should the Miami Dolphins draft a wide receiver in the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft? Get down in the comment section and let me know. I don't think it's mandatory. I wouldn't use my first-round pick on a wide receiver by any stretch of the imagination. But when you have a second-round pick, you're going to have 2 third-round picks at minimum, comp pick for Robert Hunt and your own, maybe a third because of Christian Wilkins. We'll see what the comp formula is. Well, why not take a shot on a big-bodied wide receiver if the right one's available? But if you don't want to do that and you want to use that draft capital somewhere else, there are some good wide receivers in free agency that you might be able to sign. These are the top 8 guys in NFL free agency, in my opinion, for the Dolphins. Stephon Diggs is likely to be too expensive, also coming off a pretty big-time knee injury. T. Higgins is probably out of the price point for Miami. They can create the cap space to sign T. Higgins, but I'm expecting a team like Pittsburgh, a team like New England, a team like the Chargers potentially throw $30+ million at T. Higgins. Mari Cooper is fascinating. I kind of like Mike Williams. Signed a 1-year deal with Pittsburgh, injury-prone up and down, but he is the definition of a contested catch red zone guy. Him being your wide receiver 2 opposite of Jalen Waddle intrigues me a little bit on the cheaper side. Same thing goes with Darius Slayton. DeAndre Hopkins is up there in age. I think you could get him for a little bit of a cheaper contract. And then you have Chris Godwin and Deontay Johnson. I don't know if I'd bring in Deontay, kind of a headache, but the talent's there. Godwin coming off knee injury, might be cheap, can play outside, can play inside, beat you with his red zone, route running ability. These are 8 guys that I would have in mind if the price point is correct for the Dolphins. But like I said, I'm going to double down on this here. I'm looking for red zone targets. I'm looking for guys that can make Tua's life easier in the red zone. And that's just helpful to any quarterback. A guy that you can just trust in one-on-one situations. Throw it up there. Make a play. Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are an unbelievable wide receiver duo. But the fact is this. They rely on speed more than route running and ability to win in contested catch abilities. How many times did we see Tyreek this year try to go up in a contested catch situation and fail? Like, it's no knock on them. It's just that's not the way they play their game. That's not their style. And I'd like to get a nice accumulation of wide receivers. You have the speed in Waddle. You have the route running over the middle and big play after the catch ability in Malik Washington. Then you get a contested catch guy for red zone, and then you also pair that up with Jonnu Smith as your tight end, and you might have an overall better pass-catching kind of group there in Miami. All right, I'll do it for today's show. If you want more on the Dolphins, make sure you are following me over on Twitter at Nic_Rohloff. We're still dropping content on the daily, both there and on YouTube, so make sure you subscribe and make sure you go give me a follow.